water real quick. Great. Hi. Good evening, all, and welcome to our free virtual community-centered workshop series, Climate Connections for Healthier, Stronger Communities. My name is Chris Gaynor. I use he/him pronouns, and I am the climate justice specialist with the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management. And I will be your facilitator for this evening. I'm joined by Joe Posha and Liz Stone from the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, who will share with us the impacts of climate change and what is being done by Rhode Island, and well as like even from like the from like a higher like federal to global scale. And I'm also joined by Colleen Keenan of the Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council, who will share how local groups tend to engage around these issues as well. This is our first among four workshops intended to inform our communities and how RIDEM works to protect our air, water, and natural resources, and how groups like Woonasquatucket Watershed Council work within communities around these most impacted environmental challenges. Our community partners exist as a means of access and engagement for the population served and serve as a source of capacity, education, and often bring issues to the forefront on behalf of, our communities such as this. And before like I let our guests like go into their work, a few housekeeping items that I'd like to share. First is that as we go through this presentation, I ask that we save questions towards the end. Um, we will be recording the presentation, but after like speakers have finished speaking, we get into the questions and discussion, we will stop recording to allow for like transparent and honest conversation amongst ourselves. Second is to utilize the chat. Although like there won't be like questions answered like live specifically about the topic, there'll still I encourage engagement in the chat itself. I might even asking like questions myself amongst like within the chat, so like we can like be curious as our presenters are speaking. And lastly, be respectful. We have a spectrum of knowledge and a spectrum of those who are familiar with the subject matter, this is their first time, or they are just wanting to gain more knowledge on the particular matter. So like, yeah, be respectful for those who are coming into this, and understand like that we're all here to learn something and gain something together. We've already shared about the interpretation service not being unavailable this evening, but we do have closed captioning that had been shared in the chat that we can share again. So with that, I would pass the mic, so to speak, to Colleen, who will tell us a little bit more about herself and what the WRWC does here in Rhode Island. So, Colleen, I pass the mic to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris, and thanks for having me. Thank you, everybody, for joining tonight. I work for the Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council. Has a really long name, but we represent an 18-mile river and do a lot to try to care for the resources and ultimately the people and living things in that river. So this is our mission: to create positive environmental, social, and economic change by revitalizing the Woonasquatucket River, its greenway, and its communities. Just a little bit more information on the river and the watershed itself. I mentioned it's about 18 miles long. The headwaters of the river are up in North Smithfield. You can see at the top of this map, and it flows down through Smithfield, Lincoln, Johnston, North Providence, and it flows into the Providence River. Just after Water Place Park is where the Woonasquatucket River joins with the Moshassuck and becomes the Providence River. So even parts of what we appreciate downtown during water fire are part of this river. But what we like to express with this map is that a watershed is an area where all of the stormwater, the precipitation, the rain drains to one place, which is that river.
I think we lost Colleen.
I think she froze and then probably hopped off, maybe trying to come back in.
Hey,
There
I'm
she
back
is.
in.
Great.
I actually didn't click anything, but did I just
You just froze up, that's all. Out of your control.
Okay. Apologies. I think my
We can
Wi-Fi is
hear you
good,
now.
but yeah, let me know if anything else goes on. Yeah, I was just saying the concept of a watershed is this area of land where all the water drains to one place. And so it makes a lot of sense as an environmental group concerned with both resources and people, and how what we do on the land affects the water, and then in turn how the water and those resources affect the people, that we look at this whole watershed more holistically. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. So to accomplish that goal, we have multiple different departments that work on these different angles and support our goals, which, like I said, are the social and economic good of these areas. So we have our Greenway team. If you weren't aware, we maintain a bike path called the Woonasquatucket River Greenway, which extends alongside the river with multiple spurs and parks alongside it. So that provides green space, and it's a linear park for people to enjoy with bikes. It's also bikes on foot, however you can access it. And it's also a form of transportation because it connects literally those different areas that you wouldn't easily be able to move between without having a car, hitting busy traffic, things like that. So our Greenway team is rangers, our river rangers, who literally go out and maintain those green spaces. And a lot of their work and the work of our engineers who design those spaces is to make them resilient. So what I mean when I say that is that we want these areas to be resistant to flooding and to prevent pollution from entering the river, and those green spaces to also be areas that can be cool havens and reduce some of that urban heat island effect when areas are covered with asphalt, and they can, the temperatures can get higher because there's no green spaces to cool off or those areas. So for us, climate resilience looks like replacing pavement with green infrastructure where rain and stormwater can absorb into the soil. We have worked at multiple restoration sites to introduce native species, remove invasive species, and build areas, again, that can be used by the public to have access to these parks and green spaces. I put the Manton Pond site there is one area that we have accomplished in the last year. It's this really beautiful spot up in Johnston, but that you can reach from the Greenway that starts in Providence at Riverside Park, which is also a lovely park, which was the subject of a lot of remediation work, environmental cleanup. But at that site, we have a fish ladder, which helps fish move through the rivers despite dams that have existed in the water. And also it has an outdoor classroom, a lot of storm water, and there was riverbank restoration there. So just, there's a lot of detail there that maybe if you don't do environmental work, you didn't know what some of those terms mean, but basically maintaining the area of the river so that it is resilient to flooding, to change to big storms and pollution, and making it accessible to the people. To promote the work that we do and create more environmental citizens and advocates, we have an environmental education department, which I'm also a part of, actually. And so we teach in-school programs and also have field trips and after-school programs as well. We learn about food webs, ecology, and the local ecosystems with the children in the community throughout the watershed. Our community action group is engaged with making community leaders and advocates. They are also involved in programming the Resilience Hub that's in Providence, which is also a safe haven for Providence residents in times of emergency or climate crisis, whether it's an extreme storm, heat, extreme cold. And so they're always providing community resources and keeping the public informed and engaged through there. So have some more resources on what they're up to on the later slides. Our bicycle programs are educating both youth and adults on riding bikes and how to safely get around with this, greener alternate form of transportation, so that we can reduce accidents and allow people to get around in this healthy and active way, keeping our streets cleaner. So they do that program in schools, they do camps, and we do adult lessons as well. And then our last department is recreation, where we have fun outdoor trips, and this summer we're doing a fitness series. So I think some of the events that are coming up on the later slides will help you kind of get a picture of all the different things that we do, because not everyone knows us by those different departments, but they just see the things that we're doing and the programming that we do, and they want to be a part, whether it's through bikes, whether it's a hike with our recreation program, or a clean day where we're picking up trash on the river, or just a celebration and block party to celebrate all the work that we've done and kind of give back to those communities. So that's just a little bit on all those parts of the org. But if you have any questions, very happy to answer them. Yeah, we can go to the next slide too. But if anyone has a question, I'm happy to answer it now, or we can wait until the end.
Well,
but if
save it
anyone
for,
wants
or
to-
yeah, we can save it to it's for the end, and we can keep going, Colleen.
Okay, cool. I just feel like I know I haven't been speaking a lot, and it's in Zoom where you can't see everyone's faces. And I'm like, I hope this is being received well and that you're following along. But hopefully these pictures can help paint some of the things that I was talking about too. So I included on the top left, this is a fish ladder. So that is the structure that I mentioned. We work on these projects and get funding from diverse funding sources, some federal, some local, to allow fish to pass through areas where historically, before industrial times, fish would swim upstream to spawn, such as herring and alewife. Yeah, and so since the construction of dams, because of all the factories that were built on this river, has this history of this very industrial history that has blocked these fish from reaching their spawning grounds, and they're a really critical part of the ecosystem. So a fish ladder like this literally gives a pathway for a fish to swim upstream bypassing a dam. So fish ladders like this, we also use in education. We have multiple fish ladders. One of them is at the Manton Pond site. There's also one at Riverside Park that you might have seen. I included a picture of Maria Jose, who works on our community action program. That's the next photo to the right. And she is really involved in the different groups. The adult cohorts that we work with are Nuevas Voces and Campeones de Combate Climático. So they work to educate adults on how they can be environmental advocates and leaders in their communities. So love Maria Jose, there she is. And then a shout out to our river rangers in orange. They're out there building shade structures, you know, installing picnic tables, upkeeping the stormwater projects, planting native species. They are really the strength and force behind all of those things that we enjoy. And then in the lower left, our bike programs team with their kids. That's Donnie teaching about the parts of a bike, probably. In the middle bottom, recreation programs, we have paddles, get people out on the water who often have not been in a boat before or didn't know that you could paddle in the Woonasquatucket River. So it's a really cool opportunity to enjoy the space that we all live in a new way. And then on the bottom right is a group of kids gathered for a field trip in Riverside Park, which actually I was leading a field trip this morning with some first graders in Riverside Park, and it looked a lot like this. And we just get out there, they get out of their classrooms and get to learn about ecology and science and the environment in one of our beautiful parks. You can go to the next slide.
Colleen, thank you. I'm conscious of time. We have to get to the next presentation if you just wanted to.
I'll just mention what's up here. So, I mean, feel free to take a screenshot or just take a picture of what's up here. And it just has a lot of the things we have coming up. And I'm also just going to drop in the chat, we're doing a survey on litter and trash practices in Rhode Island. So I just thought this would be a good opportunity to share that. So if you wanted to take some time to do that or come join us at any of these upcoming events. Thank you so much.
Cool. No, thank you so much, Colleen. Like, looking at like the fish ladder, I did not realize that the pond that I live next to is called Manton Pond. I've walked that whole thing. It's great. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing what like Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council does. With that in mind, or excuse me, having had that shared, I'd like to transition us to DEM and like go to Joe. Joe, what do you have for us?
Okay, thank you, Chris, and good evening, everyone. As Chris said, my name is Joe Posha with Rhode Island DEM. I am the Rhode Island State Climatologist as well. I work in our Office of Air Resources, and I'm going to go through this very high-level kind of basic presentation about climate change and climate science. And in the middle of the presentation, I'll pass it over to my colleague, Liz Stone, who will take us home with that. Next slide, please. All right, so to kind of just walk you through what we're going to cover in this, we're going to start and kind of level set and talk about the science behind climate change. And we'll talk about the role of carbon dioxide, which some of you may have heard before, some of you may not. It's one of the most important factors that's causing climate change and global warming. We'll talk about some key factors that influence our climate and also some things that climate change affects. And then Liz will talk about our local and global efforts to combat climate change, and then we'll probably move to questions after that. Next slide. All right, so yeah, let's start with the science. So a good place to start here is to understand the big difference between weather and climate. This is pretty key to what we're going to talk about. This may be, new to some people. Some people may already know this. But weather, when we're talking about the weather, we're talking about what's happening right now, what's happening outside of our window. It's going on current. It could be, within the next hour, the next day. Sometimes, we talk about weather within the week or so. There's different weather phenomena that happen over a week or over a day. We're talking about rain, we're talking about snow, we're talking about warm temperatures. We can talk about thunderstorms and tornadoes and hurricanes, and those are all weather phenomena. When we talk about climate, we're talking about weather patterns over time, averaged over time. It can be months, years, decades, and beyond that, centuries and millennia. And there's a lot of different climate patterns too. We talk about, is it a wet, summer? Is it a cold and snowy winter? We're talking about different patterns like El Nino and La Nina that some people may have heard before. So kind of understanding this fundamental difference, that when we're talking about climate change, we're talking about long-term changes in our climate. Next slide. Okay, so specifically climate change is referring to these longer term shifts in Earth's climate. And today, we define climate change as our climate that's being affected by human activities. And this is primarily due to the burning of fossil fuels. So that would be oil, gasoline, any petroleum products, natural gas, coal, all of the burning of those things and different activities like in homes and cars, power plants and factories, releases carbon dioxide into the air, abbreviated there as CO2, and other different greenhouse gases, which I'll talk about more in a second. These gases will trap heat. That's why they're known as a greenhouse gas, which we'll get to in the next slide. And this is the primary reason behind climate change in the 21st century. Next slide. So we can look all around, all over the globe. There's different indicators of climate change. We just have 3 pictures on the top here, one of a really dry desert, one of a polar bear kind of stranded on an iceberg, and one of a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. But we have a lot of data and evidence behind how climate change is happening today. Higher global average temperatures. We're having more frequent heat waves, consecutive days over 90 degrees. Drought has always been a part of our natural climate, but it's becoming more extreme. We're having more extreme precipitation, such as heavier rainfall. Some of you may remember we had some really, really heavy rainfall in Providence over the last few summers that caused some intense flooding. Tropical cyclones are becoming more intense as well, tied to warmer oceans, rising sea levels, melting glaciers due to rising global average temperatures, and some other effects like less snow cover and during the summer in places that would normally have it. And even around here, as our climate warms, we're having a longer growing season too. So next slide, please. Okay, so let's go back to the science a little bit and let's talk about how carbon dioxide specifically is related to climate change and global warming. We'll talk about this thing called the greenhouse effect. Next slide. Okay, so the greenhouse effect, we're going to start off with this diagram here. We have the sun, the earth, and if you see it around the earth, this kind of thin little layer that we call the atmosphere. So the earth receives all of its energy in the form of heat from the sun. The earth then can reflect some of that energy back out to space, and it absorbs some of that energy, and our atmosphere traps some of that energy. Could you play the animation, Amanda? If you just hit the center of it, you can play the animation. So we see the sunlight going down there, reaching the earth. Some of that is reflected back into space, and some is absorbed and re-radiated as heat. This is how we can live on planet Earth, and we don't live on a planet like Mars that's too cold. So the greenhouse effect is a natural phenomena, but on the next slide, we're going to talk about how humans are enhancing it. Next slide, please. So the first kind of 4 panels of this diagram here, you'll see, is essentially the last slide. We have our sunlight warming the earth. Some of that heat is released, but within the atmosphere, different greenhouse gases, which a lot of them occur naturally, carbon dioxide is one of them that occurs naturally, they essentially act as a blanket over the Earth's surface that traps heat and keeps us warm. But as we burn fossil fuels, which are primarily composed of carbon dioxide, it's essentially making this blanket thicker. You can kind of imagine it as like, if you're cold, you get a heavier blanket and put it over you, you trap more heat and stay warmer. That's essentially what's going on with Earth's atmosphere due to climate change. As we add more carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, it makes the this blanket over this invisible blanket over the Earth thicker, causes the Earth to warm more. So that's what we call the enhanced greenhouse effect. This is the fundamental science behind climate change. Next slide. So how do we know that this isn't just a natural phenomena, that this hasn't happened in the past? Scientists have reconstructed what the atmosphere's carbon dioxide has looked like really far back in time. You can see this slide here. This image is from NASA. These are atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations over the last 800,000 years. And for a long time, right in the middle of that graph, you can see that our atmospheric carbon dioxide levels didn't reach above that dotted line until 1950. Since 1950, all they have done is go up, which to the untrained eye looks like they just went right up at the end. But our next slide is going to show that it's kind of been a really rapid increase since about the late 1700s, early 1800s, which we call the start of the Industrial Revolution. Next slide. So the proof that we have behind climate change, this is one of the key data sets. We call this the Keeling curve. The scientist behind it, his last name was Keeling, and at this observatory, this weather observatory in Hawaii on Mauna Loa, humans have recorded atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations continuously since about 1958. And all we've seen is a steady uptick since then. We attach this to the end of that graph that we saw in the last slide. It essentially looks like CO2 concentrations have gone right up. Next slide, please. We also have different types of data. So let's say we don't want to look at just the atmospheric carbon dioxide that's trapping all our heat, but what about the actual temperature on the planet? Scientists have also reconstructed this. We call this graph over here in the top right corner the hockey stick graph. So if you'll look from about 12,000 years ago, which is about kind of roughly the middle part of this graph, all the way until almost the end, global average temperatures remained relatively constant. You can see kind of a large dip before that. That was the last ice age when we had woolly mammoths running around. But at the very end of the graph, close to that 0 mark, you see the graph curves up really, really sharply. This is correlated with the 2 previous graphs we saw of atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration. They call this graph the hockey stick graph because the end of where the temperatures have gone up kind of looks like the blade of a hockey stick if you're holding it at an angle. So this, again, is another hard piece of evidence that we have that carbon dioxide, that global warming is occurring and that humans are behind it. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to talk about, before we start talking about the kind of the human-made drivers of climate change, we're going to talk about even some of the natural reasons behind why our climate would change. Next slide. So, as I just said, there's a lot more than just carbon dioxide levels that can influence Earth's climate. Plenty of other things, such as volcanic eruptions, changes in Earth's orbit, and variations in solar activity Sometimes the sun is more active and sending us more solar flares. All of these things naturally change Earth's climate over, hundreds of years, thousands of years, even millions of years. But the changes that I just showed in the last few slides cannot be explained by natural processes alone, because these natural processes just occur over far too slow of a time period to actually have an effect on temperature within a human lifetime. Next slide. So, as I mentioned, what's going on? Human activities are what's to blame for impacting our climate. Primarily, as I've said numerous times so far, burning fossil fuels, which we can see in the picture on the left, cars driving around the highway. Middle picture, that's of a coal-fired power plant. That is thankfully not in Rhode Island. We do not have any of those. Also, there are some things that humans do that actually cool our climate down as well. When we have a lot of industrial air pollution, think of back when we had those wildfires in Rhode Island a few summers ago, you have a lot of air pollution. It can actually block out the sun and cool the atmosphere temporarily. That was a phenomena that was observed in the last century when we burned a lot of really dirty fossil fuels that had a lot of air pollution. Other things that humans do, we emit chemicals that can harm the ozone layer, and deforestation is a large contributor to climate change as well, as we remove a lot of our trees and other natural plants that naturally absorb carbon dioxide and would help us out otherwise. Next slide. So just a sidestep here for a second, in Rhode Island, DEM, we actually track Rhode Island's contribution to climate change. We call it a greenhouse gas inventory, and it's essentially a record of how much greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide, the state emits every year from all these different sectors, anything you can name, from transportation, driving our cars around, heating your home, using electricity, even things like the landfill and agriculture. All of that contributes to climate change, and we track that here at DEM. You can visit that link at the bottom, dem.ra.gov/GHG-inventory to learn more. This helps influence a lot of the climate policy that Liz will talk about at the end of our presentation. Next slide. So let's talk about some of the impacts that climate change is having on our world. A big one is on our oceans. The ocean, all five, I think there are 5 oceans now at this point, are what absorb most of the heat that is trapped by the atmosphere. And as the oceans absorb more of that heat, they're warming. And because they're warming, they're expanding. As a lot of our ice sheets melt in the Antarctic and in Arctic, we're seeing sea level rise. And as it's absorbing a lot of that heat, which is in the form of carbon dioxide, we're seeing our coral reefs bleach and go extinct. That warmer water temperature causes extreme storms, which can cause coastal damage and erosion. That ocean acidification, as you can see, this coral reef really isn't the healthiest looking on this top screen, slows the growth of our coral and also weakens ecosystems. Next slide. Just look at a case study of, specifically in Rhode Island, climate change affects even our seafood. Rhode Island's coastal community, the commercial fishing community, generates close to $540 million annually and supports a lot of jobs across the state. But this industry is a great example of something that's had to adapt to climate change, as the industry is being forced to transition, what it fishes. You can see in that top right picture of a lobster. We used to have a lot of lobsters that lived in and around Narragansett Bay, and our waters have gotten too warm and they've all started to migrate north into Maine and the Canadian Maritime provinces. So to sustain our fisheries, our fishermen have had to shift which species they're fishing. An example is black sea bass, which used to live along the mid-Atlantic coast, is now living in our waters, and is something that our fishermen are having to adapt to because of climate change. Next slide. Our forests. So Rhode Island is a pretty heavily forested state, and climate change certainly affects our forest. Warmer average temperatures allows a lot of non-native species to thrive. Extreme changes in precipitation patterns can cause drought, that can cause wildfires. Extreme flooding can also stress trees. These top few photos here are actually of the spongy moth outbreak that occurred back in the late 2010s. You can see them on the two side photos, one of the caterpillars in the trees and one in their little nest. And they just destroyed a lot of native tree cover in our state. And, climate change is one of the factors to cause for that. Renewable energy development. So something that, we're actually doing to try to mitigate climate change by shifting our fuel sources from fossil to renewable. Sometimes, we're putting solar in the wrong places, and sometimes that can have a negative effect and actually deforest some areas too, which can exacerbate climate change. Next slide. Wildlife. So DEM works a lot with wildlife. Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council works a lot with wildlife. Rising average temperatures as a result of climate change can drive a lot of changes, to either habitat or food sources that will negatively, impact wildlife. Plants will change their growth patterns and essentially force, animals that feed on them to adapt to new and unfamiliar environments. And extreme weather, sometimes like wildfires or hurricanes, can also destroy habitat and make it more challenging for wildlife to survive. Next slide. Finally, one more impact to talk about is on soil. So in Rhode Island, we grow a lot of specialty crops. We don't have a lot of large scale agriculture as other parts of the United States does, but climate change also is impacting our ability to grow food. It's important that we sustainably manage our soils and, grow more food locally. That way we can better adapt to changing climate conditions. We rely on a lot of food that comes from far outside of Rhode Island. If we can grow it closer, we have more control over, how we're adapting to it. And some of these other things I've talked about, like rising sea levels, sometimes can flood, fields by the coast, and extreme weather, including heavy rains and droughts, can also be really challenging for farmers as they can erode soil and damage the land surface. Next slide. All right, so at this point, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Liz Stone, who's going to talk about our local and global efforts that we're trying to fight back and tackle climate change.
Thank you, Joe. Just fighting through some allergies here, so hopefully everybody can hear me okay. So as Joe said, I'm Liz Stone. I work at DEM alongside Amanda and Chris and Joe and Janice, the DEM team that's on here tonight on kind of all topics related to climate change. So as you've been hearing this evening from Joe and others, climate change is a complex issue that DEM and the state of Rhode Island needs to tackle. And it is being acted upon at the global, regional, and at the local levels. Effective climate change action requires cooperation across all levels of government. Here, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC for short, is an intergovernmental body of the United Nations. Its job is to provide governments at all levels with the necessary scientific information that they need to develop important climate policies. You may have also heard about the Paris Agreement, or even less so, maybe the Montreal Protocol, but both are very important international treaties that many countries around the world banding together with the goal of limiting global warming. Bringing it down from the global level to the regional level, if you want to go to the next slide. Regionally in the United States, and in particular in the Northeast states, I should say the Northeast states have been very active in implementing important carbon reduction programs. The Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative that you see here on the screen, or RGGI for short, as we call it, is a successful effort by multiple states, including Rhode Island, to fight together against harmful climate change by requiring energy-producing power plants to pay for their carbon dioxide from burning polluting fossil fuels. RGGI creates a financial incentive for the owners of those power plants to invest in clean energy, including energy efficiency. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead there. It creates an important incentive for the power plants to pay for the carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels. RGGI then creates a financial incentives for utilities to invest in clean energy, including energy efficiency, solar, and wind. RGGI generates real money for states to tackle their climate issues. Regional power emissions are down by 50% alone since 2025 due to this RGGI program alone. And Rhode Island has received $184 million since this program was launched in 2009. And this money is invested directly back into Rhode Island communities to fund clean energy programs, energy efficiency programs, as well as bill assistance for some Rhode Islanders. Quite a bit of money invested back in Rhode Island. On the next slide, right here in Rhode Island, our Rhode Island General Assembly has passed important climate change laws. Most importantly, the Act on Climate, which was enacted in 2021 by our Rhode Island General Assembly. It sets mandatory targets for carbon emission reductions in Rhode Island. And under this law, Rhode Island is striving to reach net zero emissions by the year 2050. Now, net zero means achieving a balance where the total amount of greenhouse gases that are released into the atmosphere are then balanced out and offset by an equal amount of carbon removed from the atmosphere by Earth's natural systems. That can include many of the different pieces of our natural and working lands that Joe was talking about: agriculture, forestry, brushland, just undeveloped land that sucks up that carbon and holds onto it. Many of Rhode Island state agencies like DEM, the Department of Transportation, and the Department of Health are actively coordinating as members of the Rhode Island Executive Climate Change Coordinating Council, which coordinates the activities of state agencies on climate change and goes so far as to incorporate consideration of climate change impacts into their laws that they look to create, as well as their regulatory authority. So there is a council that's been in effect since 2014 that is coordinating across all levels of state government on climate change. And on the next slide. And some of you may have heard of the 2025 Rhode Island Climate Action Strategy. We've had a number of engagement sessions recently to discuss this particular strategy that is under development now. So according to the Act on Climate, which was adopted in 2021, every 5 years, Rhode Island, and specifically the Rhode Island EC4, the Climate Council I just talked about, needs to produce an updated climate strategy, and the next one is due to be completed by the end of this year. It will identify strategies and actionable pathways to meet Rhode Island's carbon reduction goals. Critical issues like environmental justice and growing the green energy job sector are the clean energy job sector in an equitable manner are critical parts of this particular strategy under development. You can learn more about the 2025 Climate Action Strategy on the state's climate website, which is climatechange.ri.gov that you see on the screen there. And if anyone has any additional thoughts beyond today, when we wrap up this meeting, on ideas that they have that they'd like to suggest, or concerns or particular opportunities that you would like the team that's working on that particular strategy to consider, there's a link on the screen here. I'll drop it in the chat in a minute, where any thoughts that you have, you can certainly follow up with us and we will see them and they will be taken into consideration as we continue to develop the climate action strategy throughout the rest of this year. So with that, I will drop those important links in the chat and I will turn it back to Chris.
Wonderful. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Colleen, for the resources and the information that you shared with us this evening. Especially with Colleen's description of just the projects that WRWC is doing. Like I've lived like, you know, near Vanton Pond now for like 2 years, and I had no idea what that pond was called, and I walked up and down that spot. So like I'm grateful to now know and understand like, oh, that's what that's called. Great. I now can tell my friends, and like I can bring them and say like, hey, that's that space. And from like the DEM side, like from like the state side, like from local to like global, like climate action is being done, which is like that I find to be like really like, you know, reassuring for the work that I do. And you know, for those who are interested in engaging as well, like there's plenty to get involved in. And this is a good, you know, opportunity to kind of just like, you know, ask what you would like to know more on. So I want to like, you know, open up the floor for the time that we have. We did like, you know, say that we'll be here until 7 p.m. But so like for those who need to drop off, you know, feel free. But if you wish to, you know, like continue the conversation for a little bit, you know, I encourage y'all to stay. So whoever feels like, you know, just use the raise hand function, throw questions in the chat. I open the floor to the audience.